Hello, everybody. I hope you're doing very okay. So this is going to be video number, I think, number 3 of the B1 Plus English Grammar Review series. And from the book that we're getting it, I mean, it's actual from a course book. It's called the Empower series, and it will be also the Empower B1 Plus Unit number 6 Grammar. Okay? So let's move on and talk about it. So the contents of this specific, unit number 6, that is, it's going to be about modals of obligation and comparatives and superlatives. So it's not very hard, but you do have to pay attention and do some practice as well. So let's slowly start. Okay. So section number 1, modals of obligation. Um, they are a lot, and you guys normally use them every day as well, but maybe you didn't really pay attention that much to it, so they might have slipped your mind. But if you just think about it, about them, they're not very hard. So let's see. I think you already know like most of them, or at least more than half. So must and have to, about the uses. How do we use must and have to? We use must when we make the rules. For example, you could say, I must study English tonight, meaning that it's your idea to study English. No one else says. Like your father didn't come and say it, nor did your teacher, like no one else. Okay, it's just you, and you think that you should do that. You think that it's a good idea to do that. You think it's necessary, so we use must like that. And we use have to when we talk about other people's rules. For example, she has to study math tomorrow. Someone else told her. For example, maybe her mother told her, maybe the teacher told her that, hey, tomorrow you have an exam, or the coming week you have an exam. So study your math lessons tomorrow. Okay, something like that. They both talk about necessities and obligation, but must is more of an internal force, while have to is more of an outside or an external source. You could also say force in this case. Okay. So what about the different forms? Must doesn't have any past or future forms. Must is always must. It can talk about the future. I mean, just by saying must, it is possible. Like, I must do this tomorrow. This is the future meaning of it, but it doesn't have a specific future form. And it cannot even talk about the past. So for now, must is alone like that. Of course, if you bring in the past modals, it can, but that's a whole different topic. But what about have to? We'll have to have different forms, guys. If you use have to in the past, you're going to say it as had to. In the present, you can say it as have to or has to, depending on the subject and the tense. And in the future, you can say will have to as well. Different tenses, of course, will bring in slight modifications to the modal verb have to. Okay, moving on. There's a tip now. Do not contract have to with a subject. So what does that mean? Meaning that if you have a sentence like this, right, subject and modal verb and verb, like I have to leave now, it's okay to say like this, but it's not okay to say it in this way, like I've to leave. Like I've kind of seen in some subtitles of some movies people do this, and unfortunately also some actual like texts like essays and articles do this, which is kind of very bad. I mean, that's completely incorrect. We don't do that. Okay, the contraction doesn't really happen in this style, like getting have and connecting it to the subject. It does work in present perfect and those things, like I've, for example, let me just write a present perfect sentence for you. Like you could say I have killed Kudus, but you can also make it shorter and say I've killed Kudus, or any other sentence that might go along. But you cannot do this technique in here, because this here, like have, is more of an, let's say an auxiliary verb in the tense, and not really a modal verb that we use it in here connected to the particle to. Okay, moving on. More tips. Must is not that common in spoken English, and we use have to instead. So when you're talking a lot and when you're talking about the rules, actually not writing them, like more often than not, people actually use have to and not must. Okay, and have got to is also very common in spoken English, and it means the same as have to. The only difference is that have got to is a bit more informal, even more than just normal and standard have to. And must is not common questions. I mean, it is possible to say, like, must we do our homework tonight? I mean, this is a grammatically correct question, but normally people don't really say that. So it's a bit like uncommon, some would say. Okay, so let's now continue. So what about the negatives? What about must and can? So we use mustn't and can to say something is not allowed. Okay, so something is not allowed. Once again, it kind of follows the same pattern as must and have to. Mustn't will be mainly talking about our own rules, and can't will mainly be talking about other people's rules. For example, I mustn't smoke. It's not good for my health. It's your own idea. Okay. And if you use can't, like I can't wear pajamas at school, they don't allow it. This just means that it's not your idea, it's not your rule, it's the school's rule, it's the government's rule, right? And the last one, I couldn't go out at night when I was a kid, not allowed in the past. So you could also talk about the past using couldn't, but not mustn't. Okay, so moving on. Um, what about don't have to, guys? So this is a common mistake that many people make. They believe that, if have to is talking about obligation, don't have to is also about obligation, but kind of the opposite, meaning that you are obligated, not to do something. Okay, but that's not correct. That's incorrect. Don't have to, we use it when there is no obligation. It is the opposite of obligation, but not in the way that people think. It is no obligation, meaning that it's not necessary to do it. Okay? For example, if I say that you don't have to you don't have to play games all night, it means that no one is forcing you to play games. But if you decide to do it, no one's gonna stop you either. Okay, so it's kind of like a choice. It's not necessary to do it, but if you are going to do it, no one's gonna stop you. Okay, what about should and ought to? We use should and ought to give advice. Okay, both to give advice. However, the difference is that should is more common. And, as an example, he should see a doctor about his knee. It's getting worse. You can also say he ought to see. He ought to see. He ought to see a doctor about his knee. It's getting worse. It's okay, but just not as common as the sentence using should. Okay, so this was just an exercise. I can leave it for you just for about 5 seconds if you are interested in doing it and, checking yourself. But we're not gonna, go over the exercise. We're mainly going to focus on the grammar explanation itself. Okay, so we're gonna now move on to the next one. Okay, so section 2 of the grammar, comparatives and superlatives. Okay, so what are they? Let's see, and let's talk about them. Okay, rule number 1. For one syllable adjectives, we have to add er for the comparative form, and we have to add est for the superlative form. Okay, example, we can say big is the normal adjective. And if you want to go to comparative form, meaning compare one thing to another thing, or one person to another person, and so on, we will just add the er. Of course, it does have some other, small differences as well, like, doubling the G, but that's mainly related to the spelling rules as well. So you gotta study it separately. But, just from a more general perspective, we could say it's taking ER. Big becomes bigger, and at the very end, in the superlative form, it becomes biggest. You can always have like a the. It about 90% of the time it is gonna help you in the sentence. The article the. Using superlatives, I mean. Okay. Fast, for example, turns to faster, and faster turns to the fastest. Rule 2, okay. For adjectives ending in Y, change the Y to an I and add ER for the comparative form and EST for the superlative form. Now, this rule is a bit, kind of, let's say, incomplete, because I forgot to write here that it should, I mean, at least in the how do you say, 99% of the time, the adjective should also be a two-syllable word, okay? Because if it's not, it's going to create some problems. But finding adjectives that end in Y and are not two-syllable words is kind of very hard as well. So either way, just remember, it's better. It is really, really important, by the way, if the adjective is going to be two-syllable. Example, happy, two-syllable, ha and p. You can change it to happier and happiest, okay? And easy becomes easier and easiest, okay? Moving on, rule number 3. For two or more syllable adjectives, we are going to use more for the comparative form and most for the superlative form. Example, beautiful becomes more beautiful, okay? And in the superlative, it becomes most beautiful or the most beautiful. Expensive becomes more expensive and the most expensive. Rule 4. For adjectives with irregular forms such as good, bad, for, and ill, the comparative and superlative forms are different and need to be memorized. Okay, so they normally don't really follow the rules, hence the name irregular. Example, good becomes better, better becomes best, bad becomes worse, worse becomes worst, far becomes farther and farthest, and also further and furthest based on the type of English, meaning American or US English and British English. They do kind of give you a different explanation of it. British, for example, believe that farther and farthest and further and furthest are nearly identical, the same thing, they're doing the same thing. But in American English or in the US English, they say it's a bit different. Farther and farthest is used for like distance, like actual physical distance, while further and furthest with a U there, they are normally used with like metaphorical or at least non-physical things, like when you're asking for further information, you can use further and not farther information. Ill is another irregular adjective that becomes worse and worst, or even more ill and the most ill. Okay? Now continuing. Rule number 5. For one syllable adverbs, the rules are the same as for one syllable adjectives. For example, hard becomes harder and then becomes hardest. Fast, faster, and fastest. Okay? Rule number 6 now. For adverbs ending in ly, most of the time they do end in ly, by the way. We use more for the comparative form and most for the superlative form. Even though it ends in y, kind of like the adjectives we talked about in rule number 2 or 3, I think, they don't, now follow the adjective rules, okay? Because they're adverbs, they're different. So, example, quickly doesn't become quicklier, we say more quickly and most quickly. Slowly is okay, more slowly is okay, but slowlier is not okay. And the same thing goes for most slowly, which is okay, but slowliest is not correct. Okay. Rule 7, for adverbs with irregular forms such as well, badly, for, and little, the comparative and superlative forms are different and need to be memorized once again. For example, well, better, best, badly, worse and worst, for, farther and farthest, or further and furthest, which is much better for adverbs, by the way, and little becomes less and least. Okay? And a tip now for you guys, there are some two-syllable adjectives that follow the first syllable rule as well. For example, narrow doesn't actually become more narrow. You say narrower, shallow, shallower, clever, cleverer, but still we have some people that actually say it as more clever. I mean, it's not technically wrong because as long as people use it, it's okay, but more international like contexts, in more international context is good to use it with the er technique and say cleverer and cleverest as well. Quiet, quieter, and simple, simpler. Okay. And comparison now, changing the degree. How do you change the degree when you're talking about comparison? We can change the degree of comparison using words like a lot, much, far, even, slightly, a bit, a little, and many, many more. Example, she is a lot taller than her brother. The difference is big. Now, just think, if I don't have a lot in here, what meaning does it have? It does mean that she, is taller than her brother, but we don't know how tall. We don't know how much the difference is. Maybe she is 2 meters and her brother is 1.9999 meters. So that's like not a very big difference. But if you say she's a lot taller, maybe she is 2 meters and her brother is just 1 meter. So, now the difference becomes big. We can change the degree using these kind of words like a lot, much, far, even, slightly, a bit, and a little, and many, many more. So what about less and more? What are they and what do they do? So less is the opposite of more. It can be used with all adjectives and adverbs. For example, the S23 Ultra is less expensive than the Z Fold 5. So meaning this phone number 1, is less expensive than fold number 2. What does that tell you? It means that both are expensive, but one of them is a little less. So, from what I remember, fold 5 was around 1800 and this one, for example, was around 1200. So, if you just check them both, they're not actually, cheap phones, but one is significantly less than the other. So we can use less expensive as well. Good thing about less is, guys, that it can be used with all adjectives and all adverbs. Okay. Yeah, and about the as and as structure, we use as plus adverb or adjective plus as again to mean two things are equal. For example, she is as lovely as her mother. Both are lovely people. We use not as, by the way, but now the negative, we use not as plus adjective or adverb plus as to mean something is less than something else. Example, she is not as tall as her brother, meaning that her brother is taller than her. Okay. And adverbs can also change the degree. Some common adverbs are used to change the degree of the comparison. For example, she is just as beautiful as her sister. It doesn't really change the degree, but it does, put emphasis on the fact that it's exactly equal, like not even maybe a centimeter different. America is not nearly as big as Russia, meaning there's a big difference now. He is not quite as big as his dad in terms of size, meaning that his dad is a little bigger. Okay. And extremes, if you're talking about extreme levels, we use superlative adjectives and adverbs to talk about extremes. Example, he is the tallest person. No one else is taller than that person, meaning the subject of the sentence. Okay? And we also use the present perfect with ever, then we use them, of course, with superlatives, kind of to limit or at least modify the range of the superlative adjective. For example, he is the tallest person I have ever seen. If you use your, present perfect clause with the word ever, if you need, by the way, it's just going to be much more emphatic. It just changes, it just modifies the range. If I say he's the tallest person, I mean like maybe in history, maybe like among everybody. But if I say he's the tallest person I have ever seen, meaning that I'm not talking about like, I'm not saying that he is the tallest person that anyone has ever seen. I'm just saying that from my perspective, from my experience, he is the tallest. And the third tip or idea we have in here, or point, we can use by far, to say an extreme is very different from all the others. For example, he is by far the tallest human I have ever seen on Earth. Okay, on Earth. So this is a really good way of, just spicing up your sentences. We do have another structure, another exercise for you. Of course, if you want to do it, you can pause the video and do it. And now moving on to Unit 7 of the grammar. Okay, so let's continue. Okay, so the contents of this unit, include modals of deduction and quantifiers. Okay, let's start with modals of deduction. So modals of deduction, guys, we use modal verbs to show that we are making a deduction, meaning like a guess, using evidence, and we're not stating a fact. If you do want to check the difference, guys, I suggest you pay attention here. She is not at home. She is at the store. If I say the sentence, I mean it's a fact. I'm not making a guess here. I'm not guessing. I'm not making a deduction. It is a fact. But if I say she's not at home, so, and I also don't know if 100% she is at the store, I'm going to say she must be at the store. It's my deduction based on my evidence. Maybe I know that she normally goes to the store at this time or whatever. I am now making a deduction based on that. Okay? So this is the degree of certainty if you just want to, compare it with the fact side as well. So this is a fact. It's cold in the house. It's a fact. It means I know it is. But if you say it must be cold in that house, it means like I'm sure it is. Like how sure? Of course, it cannot be 100%, but it might be even near 99%. Or this one, it may or might or could be cold in that house. It means it's possible that it is. Or it may or may not, or it may or might not be cold in that house. It's again possible. And if you say can't, it's again, you're very sure, but for something negative kind of thing, right? It can't be cold in that house. You're sure that it's not. Okay? And again, so complete fact again, it isn't cold in that house. I know that it's not cold. Okay? Now, what about the opposite of must? Okay, so the opposite of must, guys, for deductions is can't. We normally don't use mustn't and can or couldn't for deductions. Okay, so just remember these three. Okay, so now talking about may, might, and could, there is kind of no difference between these three modals, like may, might, and could. All three of them mean the same thing. Like all three just mean sorry, all three just mean that something is possible. For example, she might be in London. She was buying a ticket yesterday. Or she may be, or she could be in London. All is correct. Or all are correct. Okay, deductions about the present. To make deductions, guys, about things happening now, we can use modal plus be plus verb ing as well. For example, I called Taylor up, but she didn't pick up. She might be having dinner now. So That's just a deduction, about the present, something happening currently. So this is a little exercise. If you're going to do it, you can just pause the video and do it, and we will now continue. So section 2, guys, is now about quantifiers. What about that? Let's talk about it. Okay, so quantifiers. Quantifiers, guys, or quantifiers, let's say, are words we use to talk about, the quantity or the quantity of things. For example, there are some books on the table, some meaning that, there is an amount, there is a number of them, but, you're not giving an exact number, but it is okay. It is a quantifier at the very least. It does give information about the quantity of something, in this case being the book. And when you're talking about some and any, guys, some is mainly used in positive statements, like we have some potatoes, you don't need to go and buy some more, for example. And any is normally or mainly used in negative statements and questions, like I don't have any friends, do you have any friends? Again, we have any. And what about no? Okay, so no in positive statements, guys, meaning that we use no in usually in positive statements to mean zero quantity, like no, nothing. Okay, so when you say we have no friends, when you say we have no friends, this is again talking about quantity, but the number is just zero. And what about none? So none, guys, we normally use it in this structure, none of plus plural nouns, to again mean zero. For example, none of my students passed the exam. From the list of, let's say, 100 students, not even one of them passed. So I'm going to say none of my students passed the exam. Okay? So what about, large quantities when you talk about big numbers? So we use a lot of in positive statements. For example, there are a lot of cars in this street, okay? And we use not many, not much, and not a lot of in negative sentences mainly. Again, there is not much sugar in this house. Or we can also use many and much and also a lot of in questions as well. For example, do we have many guests today? The answer can be yes, we do, or no, we don't. And plenty of or plenty of in positive statements can also be used. And just the point is, guys, that it does have an implied meaning, and that implied meaning is that you're happy with the amount. Okay, for example, if I say that we have plenty of food at home, it means that I'm happy with the food we have. I don't need more. I don't need you to go and buy some more. Even if people bring it to me, I may not even want it because I'm happy with the amount of food we have. Okay, so we have plenty of food. And when you're talking about small quantities or small numbers, we use a few for countable nouns or count nouns. For example, we have a few cans in the fridge. Do you want one? Or a little, which is mainly used with uncountable nouns, like there is a little salt in our food. Okay. And what happens, if you remove the article so if you remove from a few and a little, it will make the meaning kind of negative and mean something like not enough. So if I say that we have few chairs in the class, it means that I'm not happy with the amount. I'm not happy with the number. I'm not content with the number. I need more. But if I say we have a few chairs in the class, it means it's okay. I do agree that, the number is, let's say, small, but it is okay. I'm happy, I'm content. Okay, it's enough, at least for my student, let's say. And what about quite a few? So we use quite a few to mean a fairly large number or more than a few, but fewer than a lot. Okay, for example, I have quite a few books on my shelf. It means I have many books, but not too many. Or quite a few people came to the party, meaning there were a lot of people but not a huge crowd. Or she knows quite a few languages, meaning she knows several languages, but of course not all of them. And talking about too and not enough, guys, too many or too much plus noun, it means that there's more than the right amount. Example, we have too many students in this class. Please remove 10 of them. Okay, so it's more than the right amount. It's more than the needed amount even. And not enough plus a noun means that there is less than the right amount. Example, we do not have enough chairs in this room. Please bring 10 more. Okay. And talking about again too and not enough, but this time used with adjectives and adverbs. Too plus an adjective or too plus an adverb will again mean that it's more than the right amount. Example, he is too tall. We need someone shorter, and not adjective or adverb plus enough. So just be careful, guys. The structure kind of changes. He is not smart enough. He shouldn't be president. Just means that the level of smartness of this man is not up to a standard. It's less than the standard. Okay. And this is a very small exercise if you want to do. So underline the correct quantifier. You can pause the video again if you are interested in doing this exercise. And now we are talking about unit number 8, and it's grammar. Okay, so let's see. The grammar contents we have in unit number 8 are going to be reported speech and verb patterns. So let's start with reported speech first. What is reported speech, you may ask? So reported speech, guys, also known as indirect speech, is used to convey, is used to transfer what someone else said, without quoting their exact words. That's the whole point. That's the whole target of reported speech. And we have some rules. Rule number 1, pronoun changes. So what does that tell you? Let's talk about it. Change the pronouns in the reported speech to match the perspective of the reporting speaker. For example, in the direct speech, if the person says, I have 2 cars, in the report speech, you will say that he said, or he said that he had 2 cars. So I changes to he, hence the rule pronoun changes. Okay. What about rule number 2, verb changes? So we change the tense of the verbs in the reported speech according to the context and the reporting verb. Present simple changes to past simple and so on. Example, or in the direct speech, Tony is working at the bank. But if you use reported speech, it becomes he said that Tony, or he said that he was working at the bank. Okay, so if you now focus, is working becomes was working because it's something in the past, and technically it's not true now. Okay, so that's why we said also according to the context. And I think it's in one of the rules, but if it isn't, you can learn it right now. If the information is still true, it's still the person is working the bank, it's okay to even use it again in the same tense. He said that Tony is working at the bank. Okay. Rule number 3, time expressions. So we adjust the time expressions, guys, in the report speech, so to reflect the time relative to the reporting moment. For example, today may become that day, and tomorrow may become the following day, and so on. Direct speech, the person says she arrives today, and in the report speech, the person says he said that she arrived that day. So instead of today, it becomes that day. Okay, now moving on. Rule 4, reporting verbs. So we use reporting verbs such as say, tell, and explain, and etc. to introduce the reported speech. The choice of reporting verb can impact the structure of the reported speech as well. For example, in the direct speech, you say Qudus is a teacher, and in reported speech, you say he said that Qudus was a teacher. So now said becomes your reporting verb. If the person said it in a different way, like, maybe he explained it to some people, so you could say he explained that Qudus was a teacher, or you could use like commanded, right? To like, if it was a command, of course, you cannot really use it in this sentence, but it's still, if the person commanded you to do something, like he commanded the students to open the door, now it It feels like a command because it was a command. It was an order. Okay. Rule 5, reporting verb plus that. So what about that? Let's see. In many cases, guys, you can use that after the reporting verb to introduce the reported speech. For example, she said that she was coming. She said that she was coming. In many cases, you can use it. It's really good, but it's not necessary. Rule number 6, questions. Change the word order for the reported speech. Or for the reported question, sorry, use the word order of a declarative sentence, meaning a normal statement. Example, if the question is, can you help me? Can you help me becomes, she asked if I could help her. Okay? She asked if I could help her. We are adding if, then you change again the structure of it, like subject goes first, I, can moves to the past and becomes could, and help is again help. Me, of course, changes to her because you're not the same person as that object. Okay, so she asked if I could help her. And to note, just guys, remember this, to report yes no questions, we must use if, or if you're not using if, we can also use whether. And in the WH questions, you don't need to use them. You just use the WH word itself, like what, where, and why. Sorry. And in rule number 7, imperatives. So we use the base form of the verb for reported imperatives. For example, close the door. If you remember, this was an order, like, a teacher says, hey, close the door. Close the door becomes, he told me to close the door. To close the door. So it becomes to plus verb number 1, meaning the base form. Okay. Rule number 8, reporting statements. For reported statements, guys, we use a reporting verb and we adjust the pronouns and verb tenses as needed. In the direct speech, for example, the person says, I am tired. And in the reported speech, the person says, she said that she was tired. Okay? Like that. Rule number 9 about punctuation, guys, a comma and quotation marks are needed for direct speeches. For example, in the direct speech, the person says, he said, comma, double quote, I will come, and double quote. Okay, this is a way of showing that this was direct speech. But in reported speech, we don't really have them. He said that he would come. Done. Okay, so in indirect speech or reported speech, we don't need to follow the rules we had in direct speech and have comma and double quotation marks or even single quotation marks. And rule number 10, modals and changes in modality. So let's talk about it. We can adjust modals like, can, will, and must, and etc. according to the context. For example, direct speech becomes I can swim, and the reported speech becomes, she said that she could swim. So again, it's kind of doing the same thing. It does move back, so it's what we call back shifting. It does go back one tense, but the point is that the verb doesn't go, at least the main verb, the tense verb, swim, and these things don't go. Can goes back, meaning the modals go back. Can becomes could, will becomes would, must, for example, can become had to, and so on. But if you have could and these things again, so if you have could in the direct speech and would in the direct speech, they don't go anywhere. Okay, so they are just themselves, even in the reported speech. So this is a little exercise. If you are interested in doing, please pause the video and do it. And now verb patterns, guys, section 2. Let's talk about it. Verb patterns refer to the ways in which the verbs are used in combination with other words or other structures within a sentence. Understanding verb patterns is crucial for constructing grammatically correct and meaningful sentences. So let's talk about, pattern number 1. So verb plus a gerund. Some verbs, guys, are followed by a verb ing or a gerund. Example, I enjoyed drinking coffee with you. Enjoy must be followed by a gerund. Okay? And to negate it, meaning to make it negative, we add not before the verb ing. It becomes the doctor suggested not staying up late, or I enjoyed not drinking coffee with you. Pattern 2, verb plus 2 plus infinitive. Some of the verbs, guys, are followed by 2 plus infinitive and not a gerund. Example is promise. She promised to write an essay. This is okay. To negate it, we just again add not. For example, she hopes not to get into trouble. Not to get. Or she promised not to write an essay. Pattern 3. Both patterns but same meanings. Okay, so what do we mean by that? Some verbs, guys, can be followed by both gerunds and also 2 plus infinitives with no change in meaning, or at least no big change in meaning. Example, she started working about 2 years ago, or she started to work about 2 years ago. Both of them will be the same thing. But number 4 is a little different. They have both patterns, verbs that follow both. Verbs that can be followed by both gerund and 2 plus infinitive, but with different meanings. So what are they? One example is stop. For example, she stopped smoking means that she is not smoking anymore. But if you say she stopped to smoke, it means that she stopped walking to smoke a cigarette. So one is a very good thing, one is not a very good thing. Okay. Pattern 5. Verb plus object plus 2 plus infinitive. Some verbs need an object before 2 plus infinitive. Example, she reminded him to study. For the exam, him is the object here. And note, make and let, these two verbs are followed by an object and a bare infinitive, meaning an infinitive, verb number 1, but without the 2. Example, she made him leave his home means that she forced him to leave his home. But when you say made him, we don't say to leave. She made him to leave is wrong. She let him to leave is also wrong. She let him leave. She made him leave. Okay? No to. Pattern 6. Preposition plus a gerund. After prepositions, guys, like for example, about, of, these things, we use gerunds. Example, he is interested in becoming a doctor. So in is a preposition, and you have what? Becoming after it, a gerund. Pattern 7, gerund as the subject. We use gerunds, verb ings, as the subjects for our sentences most of the time, much more than using infinitives. It's not wrong to use infinitives, but it's not very common nowadays in modern English, so we don't. Example, killing is not a good hobby. But you could say to kill is not a good hobby either. But it's just not very common. Modern English doesn't really allow it and is not really okay with it, so we're not gonna use it. Much more if you want to be correct most of the time, at least use gerund as a subject and not an infinitive. Pattern 8, infinitive of purpose. So we use verb plus 2 plus infinitive to show purpose. Example, we work hard to earn money. Why do you work? To earn money. So what is the purpose of your work? To earn money. We use 2 plus infinitive after a verb to talk about the purpose or the reason we do something. Pattern 9, we use adjective plus 2 plus infinitive as well. We use adjectives followed by 2 plus infinitive to mean different things depending on the adjective. Example, we were happy to see you. Happy to see you. We became happy. The meaning is we became happy because we saw you. Okay, so you can make many more sentences. Another one could be like, it's important to study your lessons before the exam. It's important to study. It's important to study. We have important, adjective, to is to, study is infinitive. Okay? And we have, the last pattern as well, pattern number 10, we use verb plus a question word like, WH ones like what, who, or where, plus 2 plus infinitive. We can also use the following structure as mentioned. So verb, question word, to plus infinitive, like the one below. I don't know where to go after class. So don't know is the verb, where is the question word, and to is to, go is verb number one or infinitive in this case. You could also make some more sentences like, I don't know why, uh, to help you, let's say, or I don't know how to leave the country. Like there are many, many more sentences, of course, you can make. It's all up to you. So just do that, and I know you're gonna get much better understanding of this grammar. And we do have like one last exercise that you can, do for today. So depending on the verb patterns grammar. So, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.